I don't know if you thought about it this way, but are you clear that Procter and Gamble is not struggling with inflation right now? You understand why that is? They pass it on to us little guys. I used to be a plumber. I'm a nobody. If you're like me, you're not a billionaire, and you're one of us regular people. And what have us regular people been doing the last 2, 3 years? And we've been getting trampled on. That's what we've been busy getting trampled. That's what these multinational conglomerates, they're not getting hit. This isn't hurting them. They pass all that on to us. I want to try to paint a visual here real quick. I just want you to imagine for a second 10 million people today. They wake up, let's say they wake up tomorrow, and they decide to send you $1 each. 10 million people send you $1. To the 10 million people, does it matter? Nope, doesn't matter. To you, does it matter? It changed a few things at your house, I'm guessing. Here's why I'm talking like this. That is what we all do. We, the many, right? Us little guys, we're the 99 percenters, the most powerful, wealthiest people in the world who walk all over us all the time. How are they so powerful? How do they have so much money? Tens of millions of us, me and you, we wake up and give them our money, not just $1, dollars, dozens of dollars even. And it never stops. No wonder they're in power. No wonder they have everything they need to trample us. The switch is so important. You can switch away from big bucks. You can stop giving your money to Procter and Gamble and Johnson and Johnson and Unilever and these guys. What if we help some little guys instead? What if we band together, a whole bunch of us, and we decide, I'm going to give less money to those guys today, this week, this month, this year, for the rest of my life. How about that? Tens of millions of us could vote differently. Us regular people, we could band together and help each other. What we're proposing is that you take a look. We can give you a shortcut to a one-stop shop, family-owned, made in America, consumer goods alternative. It's convenient. It's cost-effective. It's amazing stuff. Would you take a look? Engage us, please. Please take a look at this. If enough of us unplug, we can make a difference. What happens is our world safer today than it was a year, 2 or 3 years ago? Is your town safer than it used to be? Is anything getting better around you? What happens if we do nothing? What happens if we do nothing? We take a look. Reach back out, okay?
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Patriot Underground. Today is September 19th, 2024. Thank you so much for joining me, folks, to discover the truth beneath the surface. As always, I really do appreciate everybody out there taking the time to listen. So tonight, I'm going to provide a situation update. And as usual, there is a ton of information to cover as events are continuing to unfold at a breakneck pace. So we're going to analyze the most recent developments to paint a picture of the 40,000-foot view, as we typically do, connecting the dots between the narrative dispensation and the overall objectives of the White Hat operation. And this is a process that's basically happening in real time now, with an increasingly awakened populace that can see right through the illusions presented to us in this unprecedented fifth generational conflict. But we are indeed approaching the end game, as all of you know. And while none of us can definitively forecast what the sequence of events will be, we can all sense the proximity of the eye of the storm is getting closer. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. Now, as all of you know, The big news of Diddy's arrest just dropped the other day. So I thought we could begin there. And going back in time a little bit, clearly we knew this story wasn't going away when the Department of Homeland Security simultaneously raided his properties both in Miami and in Beverly Hills last March. And you'll recall the intense show of force. It looked like a military unit moving in with their weapons drawn. His sons were handcuffed. Mainstream media was on location with helicopters in the air, and it seemed, amidst the backdrop of all of this drama, almost impossible to believe at the time that we didn't see anybody get arrested as it was all going down. And for my part, I was rather frustrated that nobody was taken into custody. And at the time, I put out a podcast discussing our collective desire, I would venture to say, for the white hats to deliver us what I characterized as a water cooler moment that would get everybody's attention, especially the normies, because that's exactly what these events are intended to do. And when that didn't happen in the immediate aftermath, many of us were feeling, myself included, a sense of disillusionment and even anger that it didn't occur on our timeline. And once again, this is yet another example of our expectations not meeting up with reality and the very real emotional toll that's taken on all of us throughout the course of this journey. But we also tempered our emotions by fully anticipating that this day would arrive, and indeed it has. So let's talk about the impact of this arrest and the ripple effects that it's likely to have moving forward as the white hats continue to play out this brilliant script that, quite frankly, has kept all of us on the edge of our seats, constantly anticipating what each next scene in the movie is going to bring and what the subsequent fallout will be. Now, we all know that Diddy was a major player in the cabal, and therefore his arrest has symbolic and immediate implications on the consciousness of a very large swath of the public. And I would argue that anybody who is middle-aged at this point can't really deny the influence that Diddy had on popular culture, particularly in the late 90s and the early 2000s, when he was at the height of his popularity within the music industry. And because of that, regardless of whether you loved him or whether you hated him, his name recognition alone makes this story impossible to ignore or downplay, which is exactly the point and the reason that his arrest is so significant. But he also went far beyond being a hip-hop mogul. He got involved in dozens of business ventures, and in that process, rubbed elbows with cabal elitists in virtually every category and expanded his influence by functioning as an Epstein-like character within the entertainment world. And by the way, Megyn Kelly recently revealed during a live show with Tucker that while she doesn't have any reason to believe that Epstein is alive, she said, quote, "We will be hearing from him over the next 12 months, end quote. And she went on to talk about the fact that she's seen the information and that she knows the individual that's going to bring it forward. And when Tucker asked her to describe how big this story is, she said it is a bombshell that has tentacles everywhere. And so we know that Diddy's takedown, similar to Epstein's arrest and subsequent suiciding, is a prelude of what's to come in terms of implicating and thereby incriminating thousands of individuals that he was either directly involved in compromising or individuals that were above him in the hidden hierarchy of the deep state. As a matter of fact, we've already seen multiple high-profile individuals step down literally within 24 hours of him being arrested and denied bail. So let's discuss the charges for a minute. This is a 3-count indictment involving sex trafficking and the bribery and blackmailing of entertainers. The indictment reveals that between 2008 all the way up to the present, Sean Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires and to protect his reputation and to conceal his conduct. And he used his business empire to carry out criminal activities such as sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, that's an interesting one, bribery, and obstruction of justice. And he also recorded and used video recordings as collateral against his victims to control them, to monitor their whereabouts, and even to dictate their physical appearance. I mean, this is absolutely massive, folks. Diddy is sitting in jail right now in the Southern District of New York, of all places, which certainly is not a coincidence, especially given the fact that Q highlighted the importance of the Southern District in multiple drops, as well as the building of a RICO case, which I'll discuss in more detail in just a moment. And this is important information because while this is a massive story that can't be ignored, we all know that Diddy himself was just a cog in a wheel. And this process is eventually going to expose others above him so that the proverbial wheels fall off this demonic train for the entire world to see. And on that note, I anticipate that we're going to eventually hear about many other raids of his associates as this investigation unfolds, during which time the White Hats, in accordance with this sting operation pantomime, are going to inject previously inadmissible evidence sourced from the NSA in a similar manner as we've discussed in relation to the raid on Epstein Island or the raid on Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen, to essentially frame the deep state players in real time for the same crimes that they were involved with prior to being covertly taken off the chessboard in the aftermath of Trump's election and him signing executive orders in late 2017, the most important being, of course, 13818 and 13848. And that's really what this is all about. We all know that Diddy was handled by the three-letter agencies and certainly did not set up hidden cameras in every room of his home or homes on his own volition. Rather, he was a puppet in an operation much bigger than himself that was quarterbacked by those who put him in a position of power to function as a honeypot for their blackmail operations. And it's also important to point out here that while the focus is currently on his violent sexual assaults on women, whom he drugged and raped by the dozens, there's also the larger construct of his role in running a human trafficking operation. And that is where the bigger story lies, waiting to be fully exposed. Now, there's been a significant amount of speculation about which other individuals will be brought down as a byproduct of what I believe is this staged arrest, from Jay-Z and Beyonce all the way up to Barack Hussein Obama himself. And while we're going to have to wait and see how this all plays out, obviously, certainly does appear that Cat Williams was correct when he went on Shannon Sharpe's podcast back in January, and he talked about 2024 being the year that the jig is finally up for all the sexual deviants out there like Diddy who thought that they were above the law. And indeed, for a long time before the military dropped the hammer when this operation kicked off, they were above the law. But of course, all that has changed. And I also think that we have to acknowledge Q the Storm Rider in the context of this conversation as well, who posted about this being on the horizon months before anything hit the news, which he has a tendency to do. And in the process, has developed quite an impressive track record. You'll remember he also posted a month to the day before the first assassination attempt, not only that it was coming, but also that we would know that it was a white hat production because Trump would survive. And of course, that's exactly what happened. There were others out there like Tucker and Joe Rogan who foreshadowed the event as well, to be fair. And not shockingly, we've seen another attempt, which I'm going to touch upon a little bit later in the show. So the same people who've always been considered untouchable have come to discover that, like Johnny Cash famously wrote, you can run on for a long time, but sooner or later, God is going to cut you down. And it's finally beginning to happen optically. And I continue to remind myself how beautiful it's going to be to watch these monsters be brought to justice and to feel the sense of validation and indeed vindication that we were always correct in our so-called conspiracies. Folks, we are undoubtedly going to see more big names, more dominoes fall in the wake of this event. And it's going to have the effect of shifting the Overton window more radically than we have ever imagined in our lifetimes. You see, most of the public have been gaslit for so long by the mainstream media with the false narrative that human trafficking is primarily a fringe crime that's perpetrated in foreign nations that haven't established effective safeguards for victims. That's the gaslighting that occurs with the mainstream media. And further, that any suggestion of famous or influential people or even corporations being involved is a baseless conspiracy. But all of that is going to change Perhaps not overnight, but certainly with the passage of due time, just like this event has proven to us. So while it may not have happened in March when I wanted it to, I imagine that right now, as we speak, all over the country, bars, coffee shops, offices, family rooms are buzzing with people who are discussing and digesting this news, shocked and yet entirely unaware that this is just the beginning of exposing an evil so sinister, so sordid, so unbelievably depraved that it's almost inconceivable to a normal mind. And I anticipate that as the direct result of this arrest, the masses are going to learn that human trafficking is not only pervasive, but also inextricably linked to every major pillar of power in the country and indeed throughout the world. And as far as Diddy is concerned, we certainly already got a dose of his violent behavior in the now infamous hotel video with his former girlfriend, who is now one of his primary accusers. And as infuriating as it is to watch a woman being beaten, having objects thrown at her, and being dragged through the hallway, quite frankly, it pales in comparison to what we know that he and others like him have been engaged in for a very long time. So regardless of how this drama was planned behind the scenes, whether Diddy was given a deal to turn on the cabal, or whether he was already taken out and replaced, it's not really ultimately relevant. Rather, we need to focus on the all-important questions of cui bono and how this narrative advances the objectives of the operation in terms of priming the public for deeper levels of exposure. Folks, this rollout is 100% consistent with what we have come to discover about the tactics of the White Hats. The plan might take time to play out. And indeed, we have to be patient, and we have been. But there is no question that it's working. The public is experiencing the White Hats gradually bring into the light what's been hidden in the dark for so long. We're moving from dark to light. And that very concept is actually reminiscent of Q Drop 4600, in which Q told us, quote, sunlight kills. So while we still have more events to anticipate, which will likely make this news look small in comparison, it's definitely worth taking a moment to celebrate this development for all the aforementioned reasons. And while we can only speculate about what the next scene in the movie is going to be, one thing is for sure. This certainly qualifies as a water cooler moment. And so on that note, let's move on to another topic that's driving conversations all over the world. The second so-called assassination attempt on Trump last Sunday on the golf course, which was strangely foreshadowed by Time magazine 4 days prior, right on the cover. There's Trump in his golf cart in a sand trap, and the caption says, "In trouble." So this is, in my opinion, the latest event brought to us by White Hat Productions. And as we're coming to discover, it takes less and less time to unravel the illusions that we're being presented with, which is a concept that's both applicable to this scenario that we're talking about, as well as the debate, which I'll touch upon in just a moment. But there can be no doubt that the public is becoming increasingly adept at deconstructing false narratives, a fact that the Q team, quite frankly, counted upon and has served as the tip of the spear in this fifth-generation war. Remember that the entire operation revolves around the ghosts in the machine staging events, which have gotten progressively more absurd by design, so that first the Patriots and the Anons could decode them, and eventually the masses would follow as the collective consciousness continued to rise. And that's exactly what's happened. And the reason that they adopted this tactic, this is something we've discussed in the past, but just as a quick refresher, rather than kicking the door down and running in with guns blazing, which is what we all wanted, they took a different path. And the reason for it is quite simple. You try to tell people something and they ignore it, they discount it, they tell you it's a conspiracy theory, and they label you as a nut job. Whereas if you make them live through it, and if you make them experience the impact of the event, they ultimately decide to seek out the truth on their own through that cognitive dissonance that's induced, with the ultimate end result being what we generally refer to as the Great Awakening. This is all about winning the high ground, which is nothing less than the hearts and minds of the people. And recently, we've talked quite a bit about how vital that is to any sort of revolution to have legs to sustain it into the future. The reality is that when one attempts to force people to change their general state of consciousness and perception and worldview against their will, that effort always fails. There's not been a single time that that's been successful throughout history. Conversely, however, if you can create an environment in which people can confront their long-held beliefs amidst the backdrop of the very cognitive dissonance you've created, albeit covertly, the end result is a completely transformed human being, an individual who learns to discern, who divorces themselves from groupthink. And so it's vital to understand that the implementation of this framework has always been the objective of this reverse psychological operation. And now we're beginning to reap the fruits of our labor as more and more of our fellows are joining our ranks every day. People are waking up en masse. So having said that, let's review some of the aspects of the second publicized attempt on Trump's life. We all know that there have been dozens of them that have never seen the light of day in mainstream media, but certainly the first one and the second one, nonstop coverage. So I believe this is very clearly staged, just like the first one. I already made that point. And of course, the most obvious question that confronts the normies right now is, how is the shooter able to get that close and remain undetected hours before shots were fired, which once again directly implicates the Secret Service. And of course, now that narrative is being amplified and therefore raising questions as to which other government agencies or even individuals in the fake Biden administration were involved. And when you really stop and think about it from a normie perspective, the fact that there was a second attempt so shortly on the heels of the first one, which resulted in the resignation of the director of the Secret Service due to the egregiously negligent adherence to basic security protocols, one has to ponder how this character was able to come so close to taking out Trump yet again. How is that possible in the absence of direct assistance from the three-letter agencies, the FBI, the CIA, and so forth? And indeed, that is precisely the question that the White Hats want circulating right now. That's how this process works. So although we can only speculate as to how all of this is going to play out, we know that eventually the entire intelligence community, minus the DIA and the NSA, are going to be fully exposed as a tool of the cabal to insulate their power and project their own crimes onto their political opponents, while at the same time weaponizing the apparatus at their disposal against the American people in an effort to both identify and silence anyone opposing their agenda. Just like Epstein and Diddy used blackmail to put powerful people into submission, in a similar way, the three-letter agencies have been collecting dirt on everyone. They've been doing it on a macro level, abusing the powers that they granted themselves after the 9/11 false flag, with the passage of the Patriot Act and the Homeland Security Act, to ultimately subjugate and enslave the entirety of the population in accordance with their New World Order agenda, their endgame. And so when we apply that lens to each of these scripted events, it becomes crystal clear that the narratives that surface in the aftermath were meticulously planned by the White Hats with the intention of directing the spotlight of public consciousness squarely on the very questions that we just outlined. It's also incredibly important that we connect the dots between Diddy's public takedown, the Haitian migrant crime wave narrative that's running rampant in the mainstream media, and Hillary, once again, reemerging in the news in the wake of the second assassination attempt on Trump, to repeat the same tired and predictable mantra that he is a threat to democracy. Even though we don't live in a democracy, we live in a constitutional republic, but I digress. It's been widely publicized that Diddy, in addition to his Haitian tattoo and close relationship with Barack Obama, also has connections to Rachel Chandler, whom Q identified as the key with regard to Epstein and his blackmail honeypotting operation. And as my good friend Dave at News Treason reminded us in a recent post, Drop 4566, which highlights crimes against humanity as a common denominator, alludes to these puzzle pieces coming together to build a RICO case against the aforementioned individuals. And of course, many others that we haven't discussed directly during the course of this conversation, who conspired to constitute the framework of this industrial scale criminal enterprise, which ultimately leads back to the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds at the top of the pyramid to insulate their power structure by way of blackmailing virtually every individual who could potentially pose a threat to their agenda, and forcing them to serve this evil in fear of reprisals either against their reputation or their loved ones or both. Not only that, it supports the postulation that SG Anon made during our last conversation, that there remains a very strong possibility that we're going to see Hillary Rodham Clinton replace Kamala Harris prior to November 5th. But regardless of how it all plays out, folks, the public-facing aspect of the Q operation is all about manufacturing cognitive dissonance and thereby prompting the masses to engage in a self-directed process of deprogramming, as they're forced to confront questions that can't be ignored. And to that end, the White Hats are masterfully wielding the mainstream media, which they control fully behind the scenes, to infuse a sufficient amount of contradiction in their reporting in an effort to stimulate conversation on social media to deconstruct the false paradigm that's being sold to the public. And as Mike King has explained, the White Hats are using the Mockingbird lockstep repetition that we've all been indoctrinated with to inject into the public conversation the information that they want to be deconstructed outside the purview of establishment communication platforms, i.e. X, Truth Social, Telegram, etc., which fell into Alliance hands, by the way, as the direct result of Executive Orders 13818 and 13848. That's been the basic paradigm. And at the same time, they're allowing the talking heads to continue discrediting themselves by overtly lying to the public, because at the end of the day, the entire corrupt temple has to come down. So getting back to the assassination attempt last Sunday, we can clearly see that this was a glaringly obvious example of the aforementioned strategy. We came to discover literally within minutes that the shooter appeared in an Azov battalion propaganda video. In fact, Dmitry Medvedev came out and said that this guy was essentially taking orders from his handlers in Ukraine. And we can logically infer that what he really means is that this individual was a CIA asset. Because we all know that post-2014 Maidan coup Ukraine was basically a CIA outpost intended to engineer World War III with Russia by violating the Minsk II agreements by way of positioning missiles in their backyard and engaging in an attempted genocide in the Donbass region. So once again, these are the crumbs that the White Hats are injecting into the public discourse, which will inevitably lead to the top of the intelligence community hierarchy and eventually to the heads of state and even those above them puppeteering the entire matrix. Now, in addition to the details I've already mentioned, and undoubtedly more will emerge in the coming days and weeks, we also know that the FBI spokesperson who has been briefing the media on this investigation is a notorious Trump hater. And speaking of hate, isn't it interesting that Trump posted his opinion of Taylor Swift at 10:44, pointing to a drop that happens to show Obama and mentions an AK-47, which just so happened to be the weapon that the shooter used that was subsequently found in the bushes on the golf course, according to a post by Don Jr. on Truth Social. And when you look up Obama's official presidential portrait, the background is indeed a bush, as was his predecessor. And we can only speculate as to whether this is a subtle hint foreshadowing two other deep state presidents who are soon to be reintroduced into the ongoing conversation as it pertains to both 9/11 and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. As Q told us, everything has meaning. So like I said, it's clear that this is another staged event. And we can see the fingerprints of the ghosts in the machine more clearly than ever before, seeding the narratives that they know are going to emerge in the aftermath of the event in direct response to the inconsistencies of the official story, as reported by the mainstream media. And on that note, let's pivot here and discuss the debate. as yet another example of white hat productions. But before we dive into it, we should front load our analysis of this farce with the understanding that this is an example of emotions clouding logic and judgment, as Q pointed out in Drop 2604. And certainly, this is a concept that we've discussed at length on recent shows and will continue to, very likely, as the scenes in the movie, which are designed to elicit emotion, continue to escalate the drama that will bring us to the climax of the pantomime. And by the way, the fact that scripted dramas are meant to trigger us on an emotional level, combined with Q's warning to all of the Anons out there to not let our emotions, our feelings, disengage our common sense and our logic, is perhaps the best argument that the events that we're being subjected to right now, i.e. the scenes in the movie, are not intended for us to absorb. Rather, our duty is to observe objectively, having already awakened to the sting operation that's taking place. And quite frankly, that message will continue to prove vital to all of us as we continue to push forward headlong into the eye of the storm. So with that in mind, let's talk about the initial response to the debate versus post 48-hour rule and all that we've come to discover during that time frame, which has had the effect of completely transforming the perspective of so many people out there, myself included. Now, initially, it appeared that Trump looked tired, he looked defensive, while fake Kamala created the illusion of being polished and well-prepared. And this is clearly not what most of us were anticipating when we sat down to watch Trump mop the floor with her. I happened to be watching the debate while simultaneously observing the reactions of fellow patriots and immediately identified the emotional response many people were having because their expectations were not being met. There was a pervasive negativity in the chat because folks were confused as to why Trump wasn't using this opportunity to go on the offensive and basically body her on live TV. I mean, certainly we all know that the overall objective is to completely discredit her. But as they say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Although I have to admit that as I say that, it's difficult to escape the unintentional pun in relation to the migrant crime wave narrative that's circulating at the same time, which, by the way, is yet another example of the narrative creation framework we're discussing, but I digress. For now, let's just go ahead and focus on debate number 2. Now, what I found most striking is how quickly the initial perception that I just described was almost completely reversed within less than 48 hours, as we came to discover the fact that Kamala was wearing an earpiece disguised as pearl earrings, which her sorority sister, Lindsay Davis, just so happened to be wearing as well, coupled with the revelations that she was given the questions ahead of time. And by the way, Davis has since publicly admitted that the fact-checking during the debate was only to be directed at Trump, supporting the claims of the ABC whistleblower affidavit. And what's ironic about the fact-checking is the Streisand effect that we've seen in response to the lies about Trump's statements. A clear example being the statistics on violent crime that were fabricated by the so-called moderators. But of course, it turns out, once again, Trump is right. And indeed, violent crime is up more than 40%. So as the direct result of their attempts at gaslighting the American electorate, more attention is being brought to the substance of the debate, which I think was the entire purpose. The mainstream media, just like we talked about earlier, is not being interrupted in the process of destroying themselves, while simultaneously achieving white hat objectives in terms of narrative seeding. I also find it fascinating that just prior to the debate, Trump issued a cease and desist order on Truth Social pertaining to election interference in conjunction with Executive Order 13848, which had just been renewed yet again by fake Biden, who quite frankly should have been wearing the Trump 2024 hat when he did it. And for those who don't know, that executive order has a specific clause addressing political operatives who knowingly engage in disinformation in an effort to sway the election. And Trump's cease and desist specifically mentioned political operatives. Now add to that the comms from our commander-in-chief in the aftermath of this 3-on-1 attack, which pointed directly to some very interesting Q drops. The hashtag that Trump posted, which indicates a checkmate in chess, by the way, was posted at 3:16. And if you convert that to military time, 15:16, drop 1516, references David Muir being identified in the WikiLeaks as a political operative working for the Clinton campaign in 2016. And who can forget the September 10th delta on the date of the debate, which was post 4657, that just so happened to mention the two main narratives that we just discussed, being provided the questions ahead of time and assistance in the form of a special communications device. So yet again, the same pattern is playing out in terms of both white hat tactics, as we've been discussing, and the initial emotional reaction to the events, versus the drastically different conclusions drawn in the aftermath when we deconstruct the illusion that's presented to us. Trump and the White Hats knew that once the Anons did their job as the civilian wing of this alliance with the military, that this debate would serve to underscore our trust in the plan and to reassure us that indeed patriots are in control behind the scenes. So with all that said, why don't we round out the show tonight by briefly touching upon both the economic front and some geopolitical developments, which we've already established are intimately connected and indeed functioning in tandem to bring us to the precipice that Q defined as the scare necessary event, a component of which is the sum of all fears Nessun Dorma scenario involving the threat of a nuclear exchange. And by the way, Trump just played that last night, once again, at his rally. So as far as the geopolitical theater, after recently hearing reports of Ukrainian attacks on the Kursk region, which, by the way, houses a nuclear reactor site, we most definitely are witnessing a rapid acceleration of tensions between Russia and NATO stemming from the Wag the Dog proxy war in Ukraine. And of course, I'm referring to the fact that Putin, during a recent live interview that was then amplified at the UN by his surrogates, made it very clear that long-range missile strikes into Russian territory, which require Western satellite use and technological expertise from NATO countries, would amount to nothing less than a declaration of war. And by the way, this came on the heels of Russia amending their nuclear doctrine to legitimize a first strike policy in the event that their forces are threatened by the West. And not only that, in the days since the interview I just referenced, Putin has also warned the West that there is no chance of achieving military superiority over his country because they have far more advanced weaponry. They have a vast advantage in manpower. He's just drawn upon that recently, activating millions of more troops. And they have the biggest guns, the largest nuclear weapons stockpile in the world. We also know that Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, has mobilized his military to within striking distance of Kiev in the event of a provocation that would necessitate opening up a new front aiming to completely annihilate Zelensky's puppet regime. And this is all happening amidst the backdrop of an ever-increasing BRICS alliance that we've identified for some time now as having military components as well, which is completely intuitive given the fact that these nations are actively pursuing de-dollarization, which is the real reason, coupled with economic conquest using the US dollar as a weapon, that we are repeatedly led to war by the cabal puppets that we've previously identified as our duly elected leaders. But by this point, I think even the normies are beginning to crack the code on that one. But the bottom line here, folks, is that the White Hat Alliance, which is indeed worldwide, is setting the stage for a World War III scare event that will in all likelihood involve China making a move on Taiwan, North Korea menacing its neighbors to the south as well as Japan, and a coalition of Middle Eastern nations, likely led by Iran, to cut the head off the snake by taking down the Zionists, who've been occupying the Holy Land under false pretenses ever since the now expired Balfour Declaration at the end of the Second World War. And as the optics continue to intensify, it's always worth reminding folks of the references that Q made to both Putin and Xi Jinping working with the White Hats to take down the cabal. And we have to remember that the optics surrounding this precipice World War III scare event scenario are going to look quite convincing. And therefore, we need to constantly reinforce the foundation that we've built together along the way of this journey over the past 3.5 years. Meanwhile, on the financial front, we're continuing to see the signposts get increasingly visible as we inch closer to the economic abyss that, quite frankly, has been approaching for decades now. due to the Ponzi scheme nature of the Federal Reserve, which masquerades as our monetary system. It just came out that the U.S. has spent $1 trillion this year on interest payments alone, stemming from our ever-increasing national debt, which has eclipsed $35 trillion. And of course, yesterday, the Fed cut rates by 0.5% to address this issue, specifically the turmoil in the housing market. And just for point of reference, the last two times they did this, in 2001 and in 2007, the S&P fell between 40 and 55%. Unemployment rates skyrocketed, and recession followed. So you tell me where you think this is headed. Meanwhile, we're watching gold and silver surge as the Treasury bond crisis intensifies, which is due to multiple different factors, of course. For instance, the seismic decrease in the labor force, skyrocketing commercial and home loan defaults, and record high personal debt to income ratios that are quite simply unsustainable. And again, as a part of the pantomime, because the White Hats have backstopped all of this behind the scenes, this is why Trump is constantly saying that we are a nation in decline. And at the same time is proposing a myriad of economic policy initiatives to right the ship before it's too late. He's recently announced that he'll reduce the cost of new homes by 30 to 50% and open up large portions of federally owned land for new constructions. He's also proposed eliminating tax on tips and on overtime, leveraging tariffs on foreign goods, and the Strategic National Bitcoin Reserve to reduce the debt. And you'll recall that's a concept that I've discussed on previous shows and will no doubt revisit at the appropriate time when new information becomes available. And so as the world continues to band together to neutralize the cabal's fiat debt prison, we continue to steamroll directly into the controlled demolition financial collapse that we have long anticipated will be the one event above and beyond any other that will force the sleepers to awaken. And that is losing access to their money. In some ways, it's a sad reality that our quest to red pill the population by appealing to their sense of morality and what should be their basic survival instincts appears to be an insufficient incentive for people to shake off their slumber. But the harsh truth of the matter, folks, is that the MK Ultra programming runs so deep that for many folks out there, the only event that will get them to pay attention and to question their outlook on the world is cutting the purse strings, albeit temporarily, and as we've already mentioned, in a controlled demolition environment, to literally force the public, the people out there who are resisting all of this cognitive dissonance, to finally redirect their focus. And when we stop to consider the cabal-constructed debt prison in which we were all conditioned and even forced in some cases to prioritize money above morality, and even above our survival instincts, the sad reality that I just described stands to reason. We also have to remember that deconstructing the enemy mentality is ultimately our collective mission. It's one that we've embraced, and in my opinion, it's what we signed up for when we chose to be here. The reward for which is the everlasting sense of peace in our souls, just knowing that we gave everything that we had. We made sacrifices that others wouldn't make. And against all odds, we stood up for the truth so that the White Hats could achieve the efforts that we outlined here tonight. Make no mistake about it, folks. There is no greater love than what we have accepted as our collective mission: to raise the frequency of this world, to make straight the path for the Lord in preparation for his mighty hand to intervene and to deliver us from an evil so dark that it defies comprehension. But indeed, that is what we signed up for. And it's not only what we signed up for, it's what we live for. It's what we've dedicated our entire lives to. It's what we would lay down our lives for if it ever became necessary. And for that reason, I always refer to each and every one of you out there as the salt of the earth. And I mean that from the depths of my soul, because you made the choice to be here. And you were also chosen as well by our Father, who judges the heart first. My fellow patriots, we have fought valiantly as truth warriors. And indeed, the fight continues. We're not done yet. But what lies ahead, just over the horizon, is a glory that no words could ever do justice to. And so our task moving forward is to hold the line, until the ending of the movie finally arrives, at which point the real work of rebuilding what's been broken and pioneering the golden age begins. We have to keep in mind that as long as this process has been, it's but a prelude to the epic times ahead. I love each and every one of you deeply, and quite frankly, the gift of being a focal point to bring all of us together remains the greatest honor of my life. I salute you, my brothers and sisters. Remain strong in your faith, rest in your foundation, and when necessary, remind yourself why you chose this fight to begin with. When you find yourself weary, when you find yourself doubting, when you find yourself frustrated and angry, and in those moments, if you listen closely to the quiet voice of God, he'll whisper into your ear what you've known all along. He's already won, and the very best is yet to come. All right, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. Please do me a favor and hit the like button if you did, and share it all over the place so that we can expand the influence of this platform. I also want to mention that there are several ways that you can support my work if you are so inclined. All of the links that I'm about to discuss are right in the description. First one I'm going to talk about briefly is patriotundergroundgold.com, or you could also go to patriotundergroundsilver.com. I've partnered with the best in the business to help my audience roll over their 401ks and IRAs out of the rigged stock market for all the reasons that we discussed tonight and into precious metals, which is indeed constitutional money. I've had many, many people in the audience out there make this transition, and quite frankly, I have had nothing but positive feedback from folks in the audience. They're sleeping better at night just knowing that their hard-earned retirement income is safe and secure in gold and silver, precious metals, folks. This is the direction that the whole world is going. You have to read the tea leaves for yourself and make your own decision. I'm not a financial advisor, of course, but you don't have to be to have common sense and be able to see the direction that things are going. The other way you can support me is by making the switch, patriotswitch.com/Patriot Underground, to a company that is US based, manufactures their products here in America that are very high quality, non-toxic, competitively priced, shipped directly to your door. They have the best vitamins, they have the best essential oils, house cleaning products, personal hygiene products. The list just goes on and on. I made the switch over 2 years ago and I never looked back. I am super happy with the quality of these products, and I guarantee you will be too. So check out that link in the description. Again, it's patriotswitch.com/Patriot Underground. I also want to mention my locals community. Many folks out there in the audience who are listening right now are already monthly supporters, and you can click on the link in the description, patriotunderground.locals.com/support. You can become a member for $5 a month to get first access to all of my new content, as well as the opportunity to take part in Patriot roundtables and live Q&A sessions. I haven't done any of those recently because I've been very busy, but I am intent on scheduling at least a Patriot roundtable in the very near future, and hopefully a Q&A session as well. So you can become a member for $5 a month. You could also make a one-time donation using that same link. And I just want to say God bless to everybody out there who has decided to become a member of my community. And it's wonderful to watch it keep growing. It's a great way to interact with me and fellow patriots out there, like-minded people. So I highly encourage folks to check that out. Last but not least, I want to mention my merch store, patriotunderground.shop. You can go there and pick up a t-shirt, a hoodie. I've got beer mugs, coffee mugs for coffee chats, stickers. I got a wide variety of items to choose from, all very affordable, and it really does help me out. I'm just going to continue to do what I do, and I just want to thank everybody out there for your unwavering support, your love that continues to fuel my passion every single day. You are all truly incredible people. So thank you once again, everybody out there, for listening. I'll be back soon with another report, but until then, God bless and Godspeed. Patriot out.